Hi, everybody. Tracy here. Thank you, first of all, to everyone for your kind words and, emails and messages and stuff regarding my family's illness issues. For those of you that didn't join us last night in the meeting, my husband is undergoing a corneal um, procedure on his eye, hopefully so we can avoid a cornea transplant on down the line. So he had part one of his surgery Wednesday and has part two on Monday. And then my 88-year-old father ended up in the emergency room at 3:30 Sunday morning and had emergency surgery on Wednesday as well. So it has been a really trying week, and I'm trying to get between work and the hospital, and I relieve my mom, who's 80, because she's been staying up there. So anyway, it's just been a really trying week, and I appreciate everybody's patience with me. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the presentation and talk to you about specifically three things today. First of all, tiering our teachers, curriculum mapping, and then examining student work. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here with the presentation. So let me see if this is going to work. Yay, there it goes. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about why it's important for us to tier our teachers. First of all, it allows us to reflect on evidence of teacher performance. Oftentimes when we're supervising or working with teachers, we tend to treat them based on our opinion of them and not always on, empirical evidence or data. So when we tier our teachers, it forces us to be more reflective, number one, but number two, it also forces us to really rely on data and pure evidence as opposed to our opinion. It also allows us to really look at and focus on the needs of individual teachers. We all know teachers are at different places in their career, their experience levels, and their development and growth. So when we individualize our support and our coaching of teachers, this really helps us tremendously to be more effective with them, but most importantly, to help them grow. It also gives us a chance to talk about teacher performance with our colleagues. And again, it doesn't need to be a gripe or, complaint kind of session. It really does come down to reflecting with our peers and our colleagues, ideally an administrative team, about where our teachers are and what they need to grow and to become more effective. As I said earlier, it also forces us to think about the evidence that we're using and really what it is that makes effective teaching. It also allows us to increase our teachers' knowledge and expertise. Much like we differentiate instruction for our students, this allows us to differentiate coaching and support for our teachers. And in doing so, this will grow them from where they are and make them much better in terms of what they do as well as their effectiveness. And as I said already, it does allow us to differentiate coaching, support, and then to decide when we need to go into that more supervisory role with our teachers. So how do we do it? Well, the first thing that we want to do is when we're going to tier our teachers is we want to make sure that we are really looking at both those qualitative indicators as well as the quantitative indicators. So I'm going to start first by sharing with you a way to look at them here in just a minute from a quantitative standpoint, and then we'll talk a little bit more here about the qualitative piece. So as I said, the quantitative, it starts with quantifying teacher performance. So that's where we go in and we use what I call an achievement matrix. Now this is not perfect by any means. Sorry, I messed that up. Let me pull it back up. But it is something that we developed when I was an assistant superintendent in Dallas, and I used with my principals to help them as we looked at teacher performance over time. And really became very, very helpful. So let me just kind of explain what this is. This is what we call our achievement matrix or spreadsheet. Simple Excel, easy to do. So what we would do is we would list all of the teachers. We would put down their their content or grade level, and you'll notice these are fictitious names right here. We wanted to look at the years of experience because one of the big questions that was going on in Dallas at the time was, did years of experience really make teachers more effective, or was there sort of a rise of effectiveness to a certain year or level, and then there began to be either a flat line or a decline in performance? And actually, Dallas does base teacher pay on their actual effectiveness and performance. So this was really kind of critical to us as a data gathering piece. You may or may not want to include it. Then at the top, right here across this, starting in cell D all the way across, these were particular measures that our students took. So if you're from Texas, you know, you're probably pretty familiar with the STAR test. It is the state assessment. That just so you know what these are. ACP was our district level final exams that all of our students took in grades 3 through 12. And so our teachers got a performance rating on that. If they were an advanced placement teacher, we also had performance ratings there. If they were elementary teachers, students took ITBS, they got a performance rating there. Other included things like oh goodness, it was an effectiveness index that we had that we used in our district. So we would take all of their scores or their rankings, their effectiveness levels, average those across, and then we would simply sort them and rank them. So anybody that was in the top 25% of all of our teachers, we put them in the top quartile, etc. So really simple to do, but very, like I said, very, very important for us. Now, in other states, you may not get the same kind of scores that we do, but you certainly could adapt this to those assessments that are unique to your school system or to your state. So this is the achievement matrix, and like I said, this is one way to look at teacher performance from a purely quantitative perspective, and ranked our teachers accordingly. So if you're in the top 25 percentile, we're going to coach you and support you differently than if you are the person who is in our lowest quartile because you're not being very effective. Now, we were lucky when I worked in Dallas ISD because before they gave us these particular indices, they did factor in for low socioeconomic students, high poverty, etc. But if you're in a Title I school where the majority of your students are considered at risk or low socioeconomic status, you really don't need to worry too much about that because everybody's teaching the same kind of student, if that makes sense. Now, if you're in a more diverse school where you've got, some students who are affluent, etc., hopefully you're looking at classes that are heterogeneously grouped. But if they're not, for example, at the high school level, if you've got honors level classes, etc., you may have to manipulate this just a little bit because we all know that our students coming from a higher socioeconomic group are naturally going to do better than our students who are coming from an impoverished background. The other thing to look at is that qualitative piece of evidence. So, we've talked a little bit about Boyles Matrix, but I wanted to pull that up for you here. And let's see if I can make this where you can see it a little bit better. So Boyles Matrix is a very simple tool that can be applied, quite frankly, to many different scenarios. We chose to use it in Dallas in my schools to really look more objectively at our teachers. So Boyles Matrix in its simplest form is 4 quadrants. So the first quadrant are those teachers or individuals who are willing and able. Now what I mean when I say willing and able is two criteria. Number one, able has to do with their capacity or their skill set. So if you've got a teacher who knows how to teach, does it effectively, engages in best practices, all those kind of things, that would be an able teacher. The willing or unwilling piece of this has to do with their attitudes. And now this becomes a little bit subjective here, but that's why it's important if you can and you have an administrative team to do it with others on your leadership team because, your opinion may be slightly different than somebody else's. But this comes down to willingness. So a willing and able teacher are your teachers who get results, they know how to teach, they use best practices, they have very sound pedagogy, they have good relationships with their students, so that's the able part. But these are also what I would consider the teacher leaders. These are the people that you go to when you need something with your teachers done. They're sort of the people that you rely on the most. They're very, very, very helpful to you. The second quadrant deals with your willing but unable teachers. So these sometimes are your young, new, excited, not always young, but your teachers that are really excited, but they just don't quite have the skill set yet that you hope that they would have. So these are people that they're willing to go to workshops, they're willing to be coached, they're willing to take extra college work, etc. So these are people that you can definitely grow because they've got the right mindset about the work. Moving on to down here into our unwilling and able quadrant, these are people that have a good skill set. They probably do an okay or pretty good job. They get results in the classroom, but they're just kind of a pain in the neck. They often are difficult to deal with. They tend to be the naysayers of the group. They just really, they've been in their classrooms a lot, for years. They've been doing their own thing. They get the results. And so they just don't buy into the idea sometimes of collegiality or collaboration. Then our last quadrant right here is our unwilling and unable. These are people who don't get results and they also have that terrible attitude. And so as we talk about this, let's think about how we're going to coach them differently. So the way that you use these two together is you first go in and on Boyles Matrix, you take your teachers off of that achievement spreadsheet and place them according to their quartiles on Boyles Matrix. So for example, your top 25% teachers are going to go here. They may or may not be willing and able. Don't worry about that part yet. So the first thing you do is you list them according to, and I just realized there's a mistake on here. This should be quadrant 2. This should be quadrant 2 and this should be quadrant 3. My apologies. I'll fix that before I send it to you. But anyway, you go through and list everybody. So your top 25% goes here. Your second 25% goes in this quadrant. Your third, so this is your top 25%. Your top, the next set of people in their top 50%. These are the people that are in that third quadrant, and these are your lowest performers. Okay, so after you do that, you then go in, and the second part is you look at and you plot your teachers according to the willing, able, willing, unable, unwilling, able, or unwilling, unable part of the matrix. So you're going to have basically two lists of teachers going on here. Teachers by achievement level, teachers by where they fall on from a qualitative standpoint about if they're a willing and able teacher. So that's the second part. So once you do all of those pieces, hopefully, and in an ideal world, these two lists, so let's start with quadrant 1. So your top performers, these are your top 25% highest performing teachers, are going to match your list of willing and able. I will tell you, having done this several times, that really does ring true. Almost always your most effective teachers are also your willing and able. And hopefully it's all going to line up accordingly, that the two lists that you have created within each one of these quadrants actually match. If they don't, then you have to make, there's no right answer, you have to make a decision about where they fall and the kind of coaching and support that they're going to need. So we'll talk more about the coaching and support and how to differentiate that in upcoming modules, but I wanted you to at least kind of get a sense of how we go about using Boyles Matrix as well as the Achievement Matrix as a tool and as a means to tier our teachers. And then, as I said, we will look at how we differentiate how frequently they need to be observed, how the kind of coaching that they need, and those individuals that fall in the quadrant that need supervision. Okay? So, when and where do we do this? Generally, we would always do this at the beginning of the school year. That's a good time to really lay out your plans and know your teachers and all of those kind of things. But then we would always look at them again and redo this process at midterm because people can change and grow. I'll give you a concrete example. When I was a high school principal, I was principal at MacArthur High School in Irving, Texas. And, we were using this process. And one of the teachers, she, had been there for quite a long time. She was certainly one of our veterans. And she had just a really bad attitude. She was effective in the classroom, got good results with her kids. So she was one of those unwilling but able teachers. Because she was a veteran and well liked, her opinion mattered a lot. I did a little bit of thinking and reflecting and did something that quite frankly, I took a little bit of criticism from my administrative team about my decision. So I decided to make her one of my leaders and put her on my leadership team. I just saw something in her that I thought maybe we could spark. And she did a 180-degree turnaround. She went from not only able, but to really and truly one of my superstars. She became the biggest cheerleader for our change that we were trying to do. She was able to sell difficult ideas to the rest of the faculty. Like I said, she really made a huge turn, and she moved from unwilling to willing pretty quickly. So that's why we reevaluated it midterm, because we saw people able to make that shift and change. As I said, it's best done in a PLC made up of your administrative team. I would never, ever, ever in a million years share this with your teachers. This is an internal only document used for coaching, supervision, and observation purposes, but also to help you plan. You do need to monitor and adjust where people are every 3 to 4 weeks, just because, like I said, people do change. They maybe, kind of get the idea that, change is going to happen and I need to get on board, etc. Also, it is a very data-driven process, and hopefully, if we're doing our work effectively, coaching and leading, we want our teachers to change quadrants. When you get your school where you want it to be, you're only going to have people in quadrants, the willing and able, and then the willing and unable. You will basically be able to, over time, eliminate those that are unwilling and able and those that are unwilling and unable through great leadership. So that's why we do this. And like I said, we'll go more into detail about what it looks like in terms of applying it to how you go about doing your work here in the next coming modules. So let's move on now to curriculum mapping. So, the first part I want to talk about is, why do we need to do curriculum mapping? Well, there's lots of reasons, but I think some of the most important, sorry, I didn't mean for that to come over there just yet, is that it does create for us evidence of student learning. We have to make sure that we are outcome based, and I know that, that term, if you've been around a long time, has a lot of people cringe a little bit at it, but we do have to make sure there's actual evidence of student learning. We can't just go by our instincts, or as we hear teachers say, well, I taught it, it's up to the student to learn it. We have to make sure that they learn it. It also forces us to reflect on our scope and sequence. It helps us to develop sound unit plans. And if you have a sound unit plan, then those lesson plans become, I wouldn't say less important, but less critical, because it gives you a broader scope. And, once you develop a unit plan, unless standards change or whatever, you can revisit it, but then, you sort of build an arsenal of plans that teachers can go to and refer to. And it's particularly helpful for your teachers who are new or novices, or those teachers who are just not effective at planning and carrying out instruction. It also makes sure that there is alignment of our curriculum, and when I say alignment, that there's alignment between the standards, what we teach, and what we assess, and that's all very essential. It focuses on assessment as an integral part of teaching, and I'm not talking about here teaching to the test. I'm talking about that diagnostic, formative, and summative assessment that great teachers do to monitor their student progress. And, since we're talking about the work of Wiggins and McTighe, it absolutely makes sure that we align our curricula with the vision and mission of our school. So very important that we take part in this and that we do it, because it does affect our results. So how do you go about doing it? Well, the first thing that you have to do is study those state standards and local curricula. I know when I transitioned from one high school to my next high school principalship, when I left MacArthur in Irving and went back to Dallas and was the principal of Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts, I was honestly pretty shocked at where they were in terms of their curriculum. We had a great system going in Irving at MacArthur, and everybody was constantly looking at standards, and we were constantly revisiting the curriculum. So when I got to Booker T, I stupidly assumed that they were at the same point. And I remember vividly asking the teachers to print off a copy of the standards for their particular content area at one of our opening professional developments because we were going to spend some time unpacking and getting ready to gear up for curriculum mapping. And it was extremely disappointing and a little bit horrifying that I had department chairs asking me, where do I find these? How do we access them? My teachers don't know where these are. So clearly, they had not been led well previously in terms of looking at standards. So I cannot emphasize enough, spend time in the standards. It's not fun, it's not exciting, glossy kind of work, but it's essential. The other piece of it that you'll need to do to effectively curriculum map is to unpack those standards and objectives. And we've talked about that last time. Make sure that you're creating understandings, learning goals, and objectives. That is a very essential part of curriculum mapping. I know I always required my teachers to have learning goals or objectives in their lesson plans, their unit plans, but we also posted them on the board every single day and went over those with the students. To me, it was like the roadmap of where you're going and what we hope that you're going to accomplish during the lesson today. You will need to look at the content and literacy standards if you have specific ones that are unique to your school system. Not everybody does literacy standards. Some of them will have other standards that they require, so that piece is a little bit optional, but I would still encourage you to think about literacy standards regardless. You will need to think about developing those essential questions. Heidi Hayes Jacobs is definitely the guru on essential questions. She was the one who created that concept. But it does help students, again, along with those learning goals and objectives, to really zone in on what it is that they're going to be learning that day, but also make sure your teachers stay on track with what they're teaching. And then, of course, you have to include the content to be taught. So, specifically, what do? You specify those skills and understandings. You're going to detail out any vocabulary that needs to be taught. You're going to explain the assessment and evidence to be utilized. You're going to help your teachers to plan activities and learning opportunities. You're going to include resources, and if you're going to need any technology or if that's a big push in your district, you're going to show them how to integrate technology into a lesson. So, let's look at a particular curriculum map sample, and you can see how this flows. So this is actually taken from a teacher, so I'm using it with her permission. The class that she is teaching is Global History 4. The unit title, and I'm not going to read all this to you, you can go through and read it, but you see it starts first with a very clear unit title and what it is that they're teaching. What are those enduring understandings? So these are the things that this teacher wanted to make sure that students really took away from this. So remember how Wiggins and McTighe talk a lot about transfer of learning? This is where you're going to put the pieces that you want students to be able to transfer and maintain as future learning. So very, very important. Then this teacher took those social studies standards and broke those down and unpacked them, as well as the literacy standards that her particular school system required. Then moving on, once you look at all of that, it's really pretty simple, quite frankly, to develop those essential questions. So, the teacher was able to pull from those standards and create essential questions that she is going to require her students to be able to answer. So if you're thinking from a very practical standpoint, this particular map and unit plan leads directly into a lesson plan. So you could, if you're a very linear thinker, you can take your unit title, here's lesson 1 under the enduring understandings, pick the standards that need to be taught, and here's the essential questions so that it all lines up, and pretty easy for a teacher then to do lesson plans on a Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening. You just copy and paste. Okay, so moving on, here is the content that the teacher wants to make sure is included. And again, for lesson planning purposes, if you want to think in a linear fashion, you pull your enduring understanding, which standards apply, which essential question aligns, and which content do I need to go to teach to the students to do that. In addition to those standards, what are those skills that we want to make sure our students do? So you can see right here that the teacher wants to have map reading and reading comprehension, that they want to do a video clip, etc. And again, very simple, going back, you can align all of that together and pull pieces out of this plan to create a lesson plan. Same is true with vocabulary. I'm a huge, let me rephrase that. I am greatly opposed to teachers teaching vocabulary where they give them the list on Monday. On Tuesday, everybody looks up the definitions. That's their homework. On Wednesday, they're going to, use it in a sentence. And, on Friday, they have a quiz over the words. A better way to teach that, if you don't know how to teach vocabulary effectively, is you need to pull any resource you can find from Robert Marzano and Deborah Picking on teaching academic vocabulary. But teachers who are highly effective, when they're planning their lessons, they're going to pull the vocabulary that pertains to that particular part of the lesson and teach it within content. So students get a real understanding, and Marzano has some great strategies for that. Then last but not least is the assessment evidence that the teachers are going to use to make sure that everything is being covered. This should not be, at the end of the lesson test necessarily. You'll notice the teacher has taken all of this very specifically, and again, when you do your lesson, you're able to align the components and break it down. Then here are the activities or learning opportunities that the teacher is going to go through and use. You would list any resources you need here. And again, this is the technology integration piece of it. A couple of these things were taken out just because of some privacy issues. So that's why you see some blanks. Some of it is copyrighted, so we did not want to include that in this particular one. So you have a sample of what you need to do and how to curriculum map. So why is it important? As I said, it sparks learning and curricular dialogue. This is best done in a PLC meeting, either by grade level or content. So with the example I just showed you, this happened to be from a school where she was the only teacher of this particular content. But she did actually, we were able to arrange with other teachers of the same content in our district. They would do virtual PLCs and create unit plans. And then we were lucky enough to free up some money in the summer, and these teachers, we paid them to come in and develop their unit plans and do curriculum mapping for the year over the summer. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but like I said, in an ideal world, this is something that you can do with other teachers teaching the same content in a PLC. It does help you to make sure there's vertical and horizontal alignment of your curriculum. So we had a 3-year curriculum process that we were able to implement, and I did this at every school that I was a principal at. And then I trained my principals when I was an area and assistant superintendent in both Irving and Dallas to do this, so that we were able to, once we had our maps done and everything, we spent time with teachers looking to make sure that there were no gaps in the curriculum, that we were covering the standards and things that were going from content to content or grade level to grade level were vertically as well as horizontally aligned across all of our schools. So, very important. This is a great help to new or struggling teachers. Oftentimes they are not given the kind of support they need, and this is one tool that really helps them to make sure that they're teaching to the depth and complexity level we need them to. It does reinforce, as I said, lesson planning. It makes lesson planning really simple. So my teachers loved it. They were absolutely bought into the idea of mapping because it made lesson planning almost a no-brainer. It does maintain that focus on standards and assessment, and it does create that synergy. So everything's aligned to your improvement plans, your vision, your mission, and any other initiatives that you have. So hopefully that's a pretty simple tool that you can use. I am going to send you, hang on, let me open this up real quick. There it is. The template for the curriculum map. This is nothing sacred about this. This is just one that, like I said, I was able to use as an elementary principal, a middle school principal, a high school principal, and a magnet principal, and we adapted it over time. So like I said, this has had a lot of teacher thought put into it, and I certainly give them the credit, but this was the template we used. I'll make it available to you guys to use as you see fit, but feel free to change it up. Every school system's a little bit different, and you may already have something in place that works better, but if you don't, I want to make sure you walk out of this course with some tools and resources that you can actually use. So let's talk next about examining student work. So those of you that have taken PLC, the EDL 700 with me, we talk a lot about what do you do in a PLC. Well, this is one of the most critical and important things that I think PLC should engage in as part of their work, and that is examining student work. And the reason that you want to do this is it allows us a way to look at student work as a strategy for teacher learning. It engages us in examining that work. It helps us to understand what our teachers need, and it also helps us to have protocols, facilitation, and alignment. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but there's a lot of compelling reasons why we look at student work, but it helps us to zero in on what our students are being asked to do and asked to produce. Also, it allows us to determine the nature and extent of student understanding. It allows us as well to look at the quality of the tasks that we're giving to our students to do. It helps us with implications for our instructional practice, and most importantly, we are able to clarify what we expect of our students. So I know before the state assessment, we always engaged in kind of a little fun activity, I guess, would be the best way to describe it. But we had all of our teachers in one of our meetings, faculty meetings, excuse me, the week before the testing, when we were going over all the testing stuff that you have to do, the schedule, and who's a test administrator, who's a proctor, who's the bathroom monitor, all that stuff you have to do. And so we would give everybody an envelope and an index card, and on that index card, they would predict predict how many of their students, what percentage would pass the state exam, and then what percentage would get at the advanced or college ready level, depending on your state exam. There's different terms used. Then they would put it in the envelope, seal the envelope, and put their name on the outside. Then we collected those and held on to them. And then when we were doing our celebration, back to school faculty development, we always started with celebrations. That was a big deal for us. We would pass everybody out their envelopes, and we never opened them. They stayed sealed, and the teachers would compare their actual results to their prediction. And once we became really proficient at looking at student works, we had a sound curriculum mapping process in place. We were doing effective lesson planning. We had good first instruction, and we were doing a better job as leaders, coaching and supporting our teachers. I was really amazed at the fact that 99% of our teachers could predict with accuracy how well their students were going to do. And I think that, when we really delved a little bit deeper into the why that started happening, it was because we were able to really look at student work and increase the quality of the tasks we were asking our students to do, making sure those tasks were truly aligned to our curriculum as well as our state standards, and that we were teaching at the rigor levels we needed to. So really important, very helpful. So how do you go about doing that? Well, there's several different protocols out there that are highly effective. I don't have a particular favorite, although I do tend to like the work of Dr. Lynn Resnick. She created the Principles for Learning, and she has a protocol for this. But what you do is you first have to identify your purpose, focus, or goal for looking at student work. Some teachers are somewhat reticent to let you see their student work because they don't really understand why. So you have to spend time explaining, here's why we're doing this. And it's not about you as a teacher, it's not about an individual student. But the more we look at work, the better we're going to get at designing meaningful work for our students to do to get them where they need to go in terms of their achievement. The student work that we're looking at has to relate directly to our goals and our outcomes. Generally in a PLC, I always asked every teacher to bring 3 pieces of work when we were going to do this in our PLC. They had to bring an example of, on an assignment, a student who had in their opinion, the best work, a student with average work, and then a student with poor work, so that everybody was bringing something to the table. And over time, we actually did our student by content or by grade level. Our student work became very similar in terms of the assignments that we were giving. Teachers still had, of course, their own teaching styles and all that, but they decided that it was just better and easier and certainly more effective to design student work tasks together as part of that unit planning. It allows us as well to engage in discussion of interpretations and understanding of the work samples, and it allows us to reflect on implications and application in terms of how we use that with our teachers. So let me give you a concrete example. When I was an area superintendent in Dallas, I was supervising 14 schools, and I had schools that were pre-K through 5. I had middle schools that were 6, 7, and 8, and then of course I had high schools 9 through 12. And I had a range of high schools. I had comprehensive high schools as well as magnet high schools. So one of the things that I asked the principals to do at one of our principals meetings was to bring examples of a written essay or report or something like that from their teachers. So for example, if you're an elementary principal, I wanted you to bring a pre-K written work assignment, a first grade, a third grade, and a fifth grade. If you were at the middle school, you had to bring something from 7th grade. If you were at the high school, you had to bring something from 9th grade and then senior. And we all sat down and we made copies of the work and we shared during the meeting. And we looked at like a senior level. This was a school that had the International Baccalaureate program, and what one of the senior students had done in terms of a report. And quite frankly, I was blown away. It was college level in my opinion. It was excellent, excellent work. And it was so eye-opening for my elementary people because I remember vividly what one of the elementary principals said. She said, oh my gosh, if I'm going to get my student, and she was looking at a 3rd grade piece of writing, able to do the senior level work expected by the time they get to our comprehensive high school, we've really got to ramp up what we're doing. So we were able to really dig in and look at that student work and change our understandings, our mindset, but most importantly, the depth and complexity we were teaching, at our most critical elementary grade levels. So very helpful, can be used in a million different ways. So this is an example. So we brought together some high school Algebra 1 teachers. We looked at their students' proficiency data. We looked at 3-year trends, and we looked at how it was just disaggregated by various different indicators. So what we decided was, and these were all of our high school algebra teachers in my particular cluster of schools. So 35% of our students were at or above proficiency. There was an achievement gap between our white and African American students. 17% of our students were, only 17% were proficient on our TAKS Objective 1. This is a little bit old. And our greatest needs were, as you can read, representing relationships, etc. So these were our high school algebra teachers. I actually did this when I was in Irving as an assistant superintendent. We brought all of our algebra teachers together. This was part of our summer professional development. So we first decided that after we looked at their student work, we needed to have a robust performance task that required our students to show and explain their work. You can read all of that. The ground rules, well, we had to be in the spirit of dialogue. We were looking at the evidence, not on what we thought the students could know or what they should do. And we had to be really ready to put our stake in the ground and to move it as needed. And of course, we had to make sure there was no personal bias. So we looked at it. Here's how we did it. We first had each teacher complete the task by themselves. Then they had to look at the knowledge and skills required to complete the task successfully. Then they had to share and discuss their solutions. Then we went back to the standards and the criteria and asked ourselves individually, does the task align with the text and the selected criteria? So this is a Mosaic problem. I'm not an algebra person, so you math people, just understand this was actually created by the University of Texas Dana Center back in 2002 as a rigorous, aligned possible task for students. Okay, this is the criteria. So the math teachers looked at the criteria to see if the particular problems and student work they were looking at met the criteria. So this is a simple solution guide. And this is the criteria that they used. And you can develop these based on, your content area or your grade levels. Then they shared as a group. So what are your solutions? What knowledge and skills? Does the task assess what it's designed to? And we did this in small group sessions. Then we looked at the work samples with a partner. So same process, going through it again. So individual, then they worked with a partner. Then they did table talk. So everybody at that particular table talked about it with these guiding questions. Then here's another sample of a student's work and how they did it. Another example here. So we've got several samples. Then as a group, we shared out what teacher learning could result from this example of looking at student work. And again, this was an opportunity for teachers to really dialogue, collaborate, and learn from each other. Here is the protocol if you are facilitating and, as either a department chair, grade level chair, team leader, assistant principal, whatever your title is. This is how you can walk teachers through identifying evidence in looking at student work and how they go about analyzing it. So very simple, the kinds of questions you ask and how you go about doing it. These are some tips on how you facilitate that process. It does, and I'm going to literally, I'm taking my cursor here and just running it over. It takes time. You have to give teachers time to think, to reflect, to process, and to articulate their ideas. So this is not necessarily something you can do in 30 minutes. It may take you several meetings. It may be in my opinion, this is the best kind of professional development for teachers. So when you have that upcoming professional development day, give them time to do some curriculum mapping and to give them some time to examine student work. And if it's done well, I think you'll be absolutely blown away by what it is that they're able to accomplish. If you're not in a leadership role yet, share some of these ideas with your principal and, say, hey, I'm willing to lead this. That's a great way to kind of jump into leadership if you're not already there. But also, too, I know as a principal, I always appreciated things that my teachers wanted to do at professional development as opposed to what I thought they wanted to do. Hopefully you're working with a principal or a leader that's willing to let you step in and give them some ideas and some help. Here are the guidelines, what you need. So you need several samples. You need samples from one student over time. They should be random. And as I talked about, low, medium, high quality work. Also, too, it's helpful if you can find something that shows a student misconception or work that represents confusion or questions for your teachers, too, because you want to look at not only great samples, but you also want to see some where students didn't quite get it, because diagnosing that misconception or confusion is absolutely essential. So here's what you do. You provide guidelines. and help them with it, because like I said, teachers are often most comfortable sharing their best student work. So these are some guidelines you might want to share with them if you're going to be leading this or facilitating. When do you do this? Like I said, it can be done at weekly department meetings, can be done at grade level meetings, it can be ongoing study groups. We did it as a district in Irving, and when I was in Dallas as well, where we did K-12 cross-grade group meetings. We even developed it where our teachers could do this across campuses. So we might pair up two elementary schools, or have our middle school working with our comprehensive high school and our magnet schools working with each other, etc. And like I said, the way that I was able to create and produce two National Blue Ribbon Schools of Excellence with my teacher teams, they were absolutely the reason we got there, was this became a part of our 3-year professional development planning. I hate once and done kind of professional development. I don't think it's effective, and this was one of the commendations we got in our Blue Ribbon applications for both MacArthur High School and Booker T. Washington High School, was that it was part of that larger professional development effort. So here are some resources that you can absolutely use that are very, very helpful. Some of it is a little bit old. I mean, I'm just going to be honest with you, but it's still good stuff. And the Dana Center, if you're not familiar with the University of Texas Dana Center, they're phenomenal. They're and my go-to resource very frequently. In fact, you'll see stuff in the courses that I'm lucky enough to teach from them. So great resource that I would encourage you to think about and use. So just think about, as part of your own reflection, I'm not going to walk you through this necessarily, but how is this effective? How can it be helpful? And hopefully you'll find this very beneficial and supportive of what you're trying to accomplish as a leader now or in the future, because I know you guys are going to be extremely competent, highly effective, motivational, inspiring principals of the future. So thanks for letting me share this with you today. If you have questions or want to go into it a little more in depth, just email me, or we can set up a individual Zoom meeting or phone call or whatever it is that I can do to support you guys. So thanks for letting me chime in with you today. Have a great weekend. Talk to y'all soon.